You won't believe what's happening next week in Washington. October 17th might go down as one of those days we'll remember for decades, not because of what's said in front of cameras, but because of what's whispered behind closed doors. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and former US President Donald Trump, yes, that Donald Trump, are about to sit down face to face. And make no mistake, this isn't some diplomatic handshake moment. It's a power game, a showdown over weapons, energy, and the future of the world order. Sources close to both teams describe the atmosphere as tense but transactional. The agenda, not peace, not reconciliation. It's all about firepower, long-range missiles, Tomahawks, the kind of weapons designed to hit targets deep inside enemy territory. If that doesn't sound like a headline ripped straight from the Cold War, I don't know what does. According to Axios, the White House has already given a cautious green light for what insiders call a strategic barter. Weapons for influence, energy for leverage. Washington's message is clear. Everything's negotiable. And that means Ukraine's military wish list is finally getting attention, but with strings attached. Very long, very political strings. Kyiv isn't coming empty-handed either. Zelensky has sent a heavyweight delegation led by Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko to handle the groundwork. Logistics, tech transfers, energy deals. Al Jazeera reports that they've been working for weeks to map out what Ukraine can offer in return. Access to reconstruction contracts, partnerships in renewables, and even potential collaboration on gas infrastructure. The stakes, colossal, because this isn't just about the next winter. It's about survival, political, economic, and military. And timing couldn't be more brutal. Russia's intensified strikes on Ukraine's energy grid have left entire regions in the dark. Winter is coming. Yeah, literally. I mean, Kyiv is bracing for blackouts, heating shortages, and another wave of internal displacement. So the urgency is real. Without stronger air defense and longer-range strike options, Ukraine risks losing critical ground both on the battlefield and in the energy war. But here's where it gets truly explosive. Trump's involvement changes everything. While he's not in the White House anymore, he's still the wildcard of American politics, and potentially the next president. His presence in this negotiation sends a message not just to Moscow, but to Biden's team. The old playbook is over. Trump's allies have been hinting that he's ready to redefine US involvement in Ukraine, possibly tying future aid to new conditions. Maybe, just maybe, a deal with Russia down the line. Imagine the optics. The current and possibly future leader of the free world sitting with Zelensky in the very city that's been split over the Ukraine question for 2 years. Hawks versus isolationists, realpolitik versus morality, and in between, a nation bleeding daily on the front lines. For NATO, this meeting is a stress test. The alliance has stayed mostly unified since 2022, but fractures are showing. European capitals are watching nervously. In Berlin, officials privately admit they're worried. If Washington shifts course, even slightly, the ripple effects could be devastating. A senior EU diplomat told the Financial Times that if Trump positions himself as the broker of peace, Europe loses the narrative. And let's be honest, that's exactly what Trump wants. To steal the narrative, to make himself the man who could stop the war, even if that means rewriting the rules. Meanwhile, Russia is playing its usual game of ambiguity and menace. Kremlin media is already framing the meeting as proof that the Western House is divided. They're watching for signs of fatigue, of cracks in the armor. If they see Washington bargaining over missiles and energy, they'll read it as weakness, as opportunity. Expect propaganda to spike, expect threats to escalate, and expect cyber attacks as psychological warfare around the same time. It's classic Moscow strategy. Create chaos, then claim victory. But let's not forget, the weapons on the table aren't toys. Tomahawk missiles have a range of over 1,500 kilometers. They can reach deep into Russian territory. Giving them to Ukraine would cross a line that Washington has avoided for 2 years. It's not just escalation, it's transformation. The moment those missiles arrive, deterrence becomes offense. Every Russian general knows it, every NATO planner feels the tension, because from that point on, the war isn't confined to Ukraine's borders anymore. And yet that's exactly why Kyiv wants them. They believe that without the ability to strike back, they're stuck playing defense forever. As one Ukrainian official put it off the record, we're asked to fight with one hand tied behind our back. Now, for the first time, there's a chance to change that, if Washington dares. So, what's really being traded here? On the surface, missiles, energy, sanctions. But underneath, trust, power, and the future of American credibility. Zelensky needs guarantees before the winter hits. Trump needs relevance before the election season peaks. Biden's administration needs control before Trump starts dictating the terms. And Moscow just needs time. The Washington meeting isn't diplomacy. It's a high-stakes poker game, and everyone at the table is bluffing. Except the one who's running out of cards. When Zelensky lands in Washington, every camera flash will scream diplomacy, but every closed-door conversation will whisper desperation. You can already feel it, the quiet panic on both sides of the Atlantic. Europe wants guarantees that America won't walk away. Ukraine wants proof that the free world still has a pulse. And the US? The US just wants to know whether another billion-dollar aid package will still buy them global influence, or are just more questions from angry taxpayers. Behind the polished press releases and rehearsed handshakes, the real question is raw and brutal. Is the West still willing to bleed for Ukraine? Public support is slipping, election cycles are closing in, and war fatigue is no longer taboo to talk about. In Europe, governments are falling under the weight of energy crises and inflation, while in Washington, the political divide has turned Ukraine into a bargaining chip. Some call it strategy, others call it moral bankruptcy. Axios sources hint that this meeting will test the limits of American patience. The Pentagon knows Ukraine's counteroffensive hasn't delivered miracles. The battlefield map hasn't changed much, but the casualty numbers have, and as the war drags on, so does the bill. The logic of as long as it takes is being replaced by as long as it's worth it. That subtle change of language is everything, because when Washington starts counting value instead of principles, the rest of the world listens and calculates. For Trump, this is an opportunity wrapped in chaos. He's building a campaign on the promise of America first, but he also wants to look like the man who can end wars. His team has floated trial balloons about peace through strength, about cutting deals that would stop the bloodshed without unlimited checks. It's the old playbook of transactional politics, but with a nuclear age twist. If he manages to position himself as the one who could have ended the war, and if Zelensky gives him that photo op, Biden's White House will have a political migraine for months. And what about Biden's team? They're trapped in a paradox. On one hand, they need to show resolve, to prove that the US won't flinch. On the other, they know Trump's shadow negotiations could undermine everything. So the White House walks a tightrope. One hand on the aid packages, the other on the campaign calendar. It's a balancing act between deterrence and domestic politics, between global leadership and electoral survival. Meanwhile, the mood in Kiev is complex. There's hope, yes. Hope that this meeting will unlock what Zelensky has been demanding for months. Long-range strike capacity, the tools to hit back. But there's also fear. Fear that this isn't just another negotiation, but a reshuffling of alliances. If Trump promises a new deal on Ukraine, one that includes freezing the conflict or limiting aid, it could fracture Ukraine's political front. Some in the president's circle worry that Trump's people are already mapping out a post-war Ukraine that looks more like a protectorate than a partner. European diplomats are whispering that they see shades of 2016 all over again. Washington looking inward, Europe forced to pick up the slack. In Brussels, the anxiety is palpable. NATO planners are preparing for every scenario. A strengthened US commitment, a frozen front, or a sudden pivot toward isolationism. Each one rewrites the map of Europe's security. And let's not forget Russia. Putin doesn't need to win this war militarily. He just needs the West to get tired of it. Every new headline about US fatigue, every delay in weapons shipments, every political clash in Washington is a gift to the Kremlin. Their strategy is simple: outlast democracy. They're betting that in free societies, public patience runs out faster than military stockpiles. And right now, that bet is looking smarter by the day. Still, there's an irony here. The more chaos Trump brings into the conversation, the more leverage Zelensky might gain in the short term. If Biden's team fears being outflanked, they might rush to approve the long-range missiles before Trump can claim them as his idea. So this dance of ego and ambition might actually deliver Ukraine what months of lobbying couldn't. Call it accidental strategy, or political blackmail dressed as diplomacy. But make no mistake, the delivery of Tomahawks would be a red line, not just for Moscow, but for NATO itself. Once Ukraine can strike targets far inside Russia, the Kremlin will brand every missile as a NATO provocation. Expect threats of direct consequences, perhaps even new nuclear posturing. European leaders know this. That's why the mood in Berlin and Paris is so conflicted. They want Ukraine to win, but they also fear a scenario where victory becomes global confrontation. As one senior EU official reportedly told Reuters, "We're reaching the edge of controllable escalation." And that's the heart of it, the edge. Every actor in this story is pretending to control the game, but everyone secretly knows the margin for error is razor thin. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the world wakes up in a crisis nobody voted for. So when Zelensky and Trump meet in Washington, the real script won't be written by diplomats or journalists. It'll be written in the nervous pauses, the careful smiles, the quick glances between aides, because behind every promise of partnership lies the question that no one dares to ask out loud. What happens when the last ally gets cold feet? Here's part 3 of the script, 300 characters, continuing in the same provocative Western media narrative voice. Every time the West says, "We're united," Moscow smiles, because unity sounds good in statements but falls apart in meetings. In Brussels, it's a quiet panic. Ministers talk about shared goals, but behind closed doors, it's finger-pointing and fatigue. Eastern Europe wants more weapons, more speed, more clarity. Western Europe wants to keep the lights on, the bills low, and the streets calm. And Washington wants everyone to stop asking who's really in charge. This meeting between Zelensky and Trump has exposed something raw: the uncomfortable truth that NATO's solidarity depends on American politics. The alliance loves to talk about collective defense, but in reality, it moves at the speed of US elections. When America hesitates, Europe freezes. When Trump speaks, markets tremble. When Biden sends weapons, parliaments argue. This is what a fragile empire looks like, a still powerful but fractured by uncertainty. And let's be honest, this isn't just a Ukrainian war anymore. It's a mirror. Every country involved is seeing its own reflection, its fears, its contradictions, its limits. For the US, it's about identity. Are they still the arsenal of democracy, or just a business that rents out security? For Europe, it's about survival. Can they defend themselves without Washington's umbrella, or are they doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? And for Ukraine, it's existential. Either they win or they vanish. There's no middle ground. The rhetoric has never been sharper. In Washington, you hear the words sustainability, efficiency, accountability. Bureaucratic code for we're getting tired. Meanwhile, Zelensky's team keeps warning that hesitation means death. In Kyiv, officials joke bitterly that Western patience has a shorter shelf life than Russian missiles. Every delay in arms shipments translates into lost ground, lost lives, lost hope. That's the currency of this war. Time. European media is now openly debating whether supporting Ukraine has turned from moral duty into economic suicide. Energy prices, inflation, populism, all of it feeds the same narrative, that maybe it's time to rethink commitments. And that's exactly the music Putin wants to hear. The Kremlin doesn't need to win with tanks if it can win with apathy. Just let the West argue itself into paralysis and the rest will follow. Inside NATO headquarters, officials talk about resilience and strategic patience. But even those phrases sound tired. The real fear isn't that Russia advances, is that the alliance falls asleep. Military analysts quietly warn that the next 6 months are decisive. If Ukraine doesn't show visible success, the flow of Western arms could slow to a trickle. The political cost will outweigh the moral one. And once that balance flips, the war enters a new phase, the phase of slow abandonment. But let's not kid ourselves. There's another reason this moment matters. The meeting in Washington is also a test of who gets to control the story. Trump's media machine is already framing it as proof that even Zelensky wants to talk to Trump. Conservative pundits are hinting that the Ukrainian president is hedging his bets, preparing for a Republican comeback. Meanwhile, Biden's allies are scrambling to spin it the other way. That Zelensky's outreach shows how bipartisan America's support truly is. Both sides are selling the same picture with opposite captions. And that's where it gets dangerous, because when war becomes part of an election campaign, truth becomes collateral damage. The battlefield moves from the trenches to television screens, from Bakhmut to Washington studios. Every quote, every photo, every rumor becomes ammunition. The information war is now just as real as the one fought with artillery. In this chaos, Moscow is thriving. Russian media is already celebrating the collapse of Western unity, broadcasting clips of US senators questioning aid, European protests over energy bills, and Trump's comments about ending the war in 24 hours. They don't even need to invent propaganda anymore. They just replay Western debates. The dissonance speaks for itself. Every headline in English is a victory in Russian. Still, for all the noise, one thing hasn't changed: Ukraine's resilience. While politicians posture, soldiers still fight. Cities rebuild under air raid sirens. Kids go to school with blackout lanterns. The war has stripped the country down to its essence. No illusions, no safety nets, just survival and defiance. That's what keeps the West morally cornered. You can't look away when a nation refuses to die. Yet moral clarity doesn't pay for missiles. That's why this Washington summit feels like a crossroad, not between peace and war, but between purpose and fatigue. Either the West doubles down and defines what support truly means, or it admits that slogans can't stop rockets. There's no diplomatic middle ground left. The line between commitment and exhaustion is getting thinner by the day, and that's why the next few weeks are critical. If the talks lead to concrete deliveries, Tomahawks, advanced air defense, real deterrence, the balance on the battlefield might finally shift. But if it ends with vague promises and photo ops, the message will be devastating, that the free world can talk louder than it acts, and that for Ukraine could be the beginning of the endgame. Because in this war, hesitation kills faster than bullets. When the cameras finally switch off in Washington, the real negotiations begin. No press briefings, no smiling diplomats, just deals scribbled on napkins, whispered promises, and strategic silences. That's how power really moves in this town. Not through votes or headlines, but through leverage, and right now everyone wants a piece of it. For Zelensky, this trip is about survival disguised as strategy. He's not here for symbolism. He's here to make sure Ukraine still exists next spring. Every handshake, every press statement, every off-record meeting is a plea. Give us the tools before it's too late. He knows that without new capabilities, the war risks freezing into a slow death, and a frozen war is a dead Ukraine. For Trump, it's theater. Every photo of him sitting across from Zelensky screams one thing: relevance. He doesn't need to promise anything concrete. He just needs to look like the man everyone still calls before making a move. That's his brand. Chaos as diplomacy. He plays both sides of the chessboard because that's where the spotlight is brightest, and the world once again is watching him. For Biden, it's damage control. His administration has poured billions into Ukraine, but support is eroding faster than approval ratings. He can't afford to look weak, but he also can't risk escalation that spirals out of control. So the strategy is cautious. Incremental aid, conditional agreements, slow delivery. It's the kind of careful balancing act that wins analysts' praise but loses wars. numbers. The irony is brutal. Everyone says they want victory, but nobody defines what victory means anymore. Is it the liberation of all occupied territories, a peace deal on Western terms, or just survival until the next election? The definitions keep shrinking as the costs keep rising, and the smaller the goal, the bigger the moral compromise. In Europe, leaders are torn between conscience and convenience. They've learned to talk about Ukraine as a symbol of democracy. But behind the curtain, they're counting gas reserves and polling numbers. The winter ahead is already a ghost in every cabinet meeting. Governments know that another year of this, high prices, refugee pressure, political unrest, could cost them their seats. So they speak of unity. But what they mean is endurance, and endurance has limits. If the Washington meeting produces even a hint of serious military expansion, and say a decision to finally send those long-range missiles, it'll shake the entire balance of power. Moscow will roar, NATO will scramble, and markets will panic, but at least it'll mean that the West still has teeth, because the alternative, it's endless hesitation. It only feeds the Kremlin's confidence. What happens next will tell us who still believes in deterrence. If the US delivers Tomahawks or equivalent systems, it signals a historic shift, the era of cautious containment giving way to decisive confrontation. If not, it'll confirm what critics already suspect, that Western policy has become a cycle of promises designed to sound brave but act safe. Some insiders whisper that this is exactly why Trump wanted the meeting now, to force Biden's hand, to make the current White House either commit or look weak. If the administration moves forward with new weapons, Trump can claim, "It happened because I pushed it." If they don't, he can say, "See, they're afraid." Either way, he wins. It's political jujitsu at the highest level. Meanwhile, Ukraine keeps paying the bill. Every delay costs lives. Every debate buys Russia another day of bombing. That's the tragic rhythm of modern geopolitics. Endless talk in air-conditioned rooms while cities burn thousands of miles away. The headlines fade, but the sirens don't. And yet, through all the cynicism, something extraordinary has happened. Ukraine has forced the world to confront its own reflection. It's shown what courage looks like in an age of comfort, what sacrifice means when democracy becomes a luxury. It has stripped away the illusions about unity, about leadership, about moral clarity. The war didn't just test Ukraine, it tested us, and the results aren't flattering. Still, this story isn't over. Whatever happens in Washington, whether Zelensky leaves with promises or payloads, the ripple effect will reach every capital from Brussels to Beijing, because this isn't just a local war anymore. It's the stage where the 21st century is deciding what power means, whether might still makes right, or whether alliances built on values can still matter when the cost gets too high. If the West falters now, it sends a message louder than any missile that democracy is negotiable, that fatigue beats conviction. But if it stands firm, if it chooses clarity over comfort, it will prove that freedom, for all its flaws, still has fight left in it. As the lights of Washington fade and the jets take off into the cold October night, the world holds its breath, because sometimes history doesn't wait for declarations. It shifts in moments like this, in whispered deals, in restless decisions, in leaders gambling their legacy on one more chance to be remembered. And somewhere far from the marble halls and sound bites, a Ukrainian soldier reloads his weapon, looks at the dark horizon, and hopes that someone somewhere kept their word.